Alrighty, ScreenAgers, we are back. Welcome back to the Canon, your favorite movie podcast, the only movie podcast providing you with a watch list of the most essential movies ever made. My name is Raf, and we've got another amazing movie lined up for you today. Very excited to talk this one. It's going to be our second Chaplin movie. Always a pleasure talking Charlie Chaplin. And joining me, I have who he was referred to me as the Chaplin guy. Like, I was told, if you're going to be talking Chaplin, you got to get this dude on. So I'm very excited to welcome onto the show Mr. Paul Klein, our resident or newly appointed resident Charlie Chaplin aficionado. Paul, welcome on. How's it going?
It's good. Thank you for having me on. I'm super excited to talk about my guy Charlie.
Yeah, your boy. We'll get into your whole relationship with Charlie, how you became the number one Charlie Chaplin fan, and all that good stuff. But before we jump into that, just to give people a little bit of background about you, who you are, and why they should certainly be listening to and respecting your opinions when it comes to this movie. Paul is a writer, a film historian, and a culture critic. You can find some of his writing online at How to Read Movies. A lot of good stuff over there. This is a dude who is, I think you're in like more academic spaces, which is pretty cool because most of the time on the show, it's just like me and my friends who like enjoy movies, like not
Sure.
people who are actually, well versed and have studied it for years and years and are accredited with great, pieces of writing and stuff. So I'm happy to have you on as like a full on authority on Charlie Chaplin. I hope I'm not placing too much pressure on you, but I feel like you're going to be up for the challenge.
Hell yeah.
Is there anything else, like anywhere else that where people can find your writings or how to read movies? Is that like your main stuff?
Yeah. So I'm mostly writing for myself at howtoreadmovies.com. It's an irregular email newsletter where I write about classic and contemporary film and try to like help everyone else understand how it is that we interact with movies on sort of like different historical, technological, cultural, aesthetic levels. And then I am very bad at it, but I'm also on Letterboxd at PT Klein. So if you follow me there, you will sort of know what I'm watching 2 months ago. I'm currently, I tallied it today, I'm like 47 movies behind on my Letterboxd
Okay.
for the year. Um, and you can also find me on Blue Sky, also at ptklein.com.
Amazing. The 47 movies behind on Letterboxd is giving me like secondhand anxiety when I get
It's
to like
awful.
4 or 5. I'm like, oh man, what am I doing? For reviews that are just like there for me to
For
read
me.
back. Yeah, a month later and think like, wow, I was like totally killing it. It's insane that this doesn't have 4,000 likes because this is like the best insight into this movie that anyone has ever had. And like, meanwhile, it's definitely not. Um,
Oh
amazing.
man. Yeah.
But yeah, I would highly recommend that people do check out your writing because it is very insightful. You've also been featured a few times or just one time on Cold War Cinema with
A couple. Yeah. Sorry.
sorry,
Yeah.
I totally cut you off.
No. Yes, Cold War Cinema podcast with Jason Christian and Tony Ballas. And that's at coldwarcinemapod.com.
Amazing. Also good stuff happening over there. Some folks might remember that we had Jason on to talk. Was it it was Casablanca? Yeah,
Casablanca, yeah.
Casablanca last season, which was very fun and very insightful. Um, okay, Paul. So I feel like we're giving folks um, a lot of like high-minded stuff, right? We're talking about how you're this fancy culture critic and film historian and stuff. But we like to keep things kind of fun around here. So
Sure.
like, are there any other things that any other hobbies or interests that you have that might not be as intimidating as some of the work that you do in and around film?
Yeah. If you so like my whole vibe is that I watch movies and I lift weights.
Okay.
So if I'm not at a movie theater, I'm at the gym. And if you like start following me online, it's sort of whiplash sometimes because I'll be talking about, these classics of cinema, or like the way that a shot is constructed. And like I wrote like an essay recently about a specific kind of 3D film from 1954. It was used on two features, The Creature from the Black Lagoon and a Douglas Sirk Western called Taza, Son of Cochise. And it's this format called Polaroid. And so I nerd out about these things.
Yeah.
And then like the next day, it's like, hey, I like PR'd on my squats. I'm
Amazing.
the
It's
movie buff.
I don't a movie buff. That's great. We're giving new meaning to the phrase movie buff. I was gonna say, I mean, it's because you're not really a film bro, because the movies that you enjoy are not of that sort of
Yeah.
you know, whatever, not genre, but that sort of like vibe.
Yep.
Um, but you are a film guy, and like I feel like lifting weights is kind of broy, so
It absolutely is.
but I think movie buff is better than film bro. I
Yeah.
think I fall more into the film bro category where I'm like, just like, dude, we gotta watch all the Martin Scorsese movies that there are out there, and then talk about fantasy baseball or whatever. Like that's
Yeah, I mean, look,
that's
like
my vibe.
I also my other like the other aspect of my brand personality, if you will, is baseball and hot dogs. Like I am down to clown when it comes to the ballpark.
Oh,
Uh,
amazing.
yeah, I want a Coors Light and a hot dog right now. I've got we're like 5 days away from the exhibition game here in
Yeah,
DC with the Nationals, and opening day is 10 days I think from now. So
yeah.
I'm so excited.
Amazing. Oh, there's nothing better than hitting a baseball game with like film nerds, because obviously baseball games, great opportunity to just like chat.
Yep.
So like I feel like there is a lot of crossover between like film nerds and baseball being like the one sport that they're really, really into. Um,
Yeah.
there's not a lot of crossover with like football. Like you don't get a lot of football film people, but
Sure.
baseball, a little bit of basketball.
Yep.
You'll get that crossover where where it's like people are like really, really, really into both.
You can't talk during the one, so you have to talk during the other.
Exactly. Yeah. That I mean, that's a perfect day, right? With some
Perfect day.
friends, you
Yeah.
could like see a morning movie and then like an afternoon baseball game, and you talk about the movie at the baseball game, and you're like breaking down shot selection and like different like edits that were used throughout the movie, while also hoping for, massive home runs being hit out of the park while slamming a couple beers and eating some
Yep.
hot dogs. That's
That's a perfect day, man.
perfect summer day.
Let's hang out.
Amazing. Yeah, we should. I feel like we would get along if we were hanging out in person, just talking baseball, talking movies, talking some Chaplin.
Yeah.
Um, shall we get into it? Shall we get into a little bit of City Lights?
Let's do it.
Amazing. So I do adore Charlie Chaplin, but I would by no means call myself like an expert in his movies or anything like that. I've only seen a few of them, but I am curious how you sort of like got this moniker of Charlie Chaplin guy, the the
The
uh,
guy.
the,
Yeah.
the go-to Chaplin head, so to speak. Like, how did this come to be? Were you always a fan of him? Like, what's your relationship with Charlie?
Sure. So I got into Charlie Chaplin because I took a silent film class in undergrad back in 2007, and one of the movies that we watched was Modern Times, which is famously a Charlie Chaplin film from during the sound era, just like City Lights is, but is like City Lights, sort of nominally silent. It doesn't have dialogue. There's a recorded soundtrack, but sort of nothing else is going on. And I just got like really into silent film itself as part of our sort of cinematic history, and the things that are going on there are really interesting. And it's a bigger world than we think it is. I think for a lot of casual film fans, or even like hardcore film bros who aren't doing like that kind of deep research into it, it feels like this, like, proto cinema, the cinema that happened before the movies really took off. And the reality is, there's like 30 years of really incredible film. And if anything, you have this huge advancement in film technology and film aesthetics throughout the silent period, and then everything kind of gets drawn back for the first couple of years when we enter the sound era, because the technology sort of necessitates shots no longer being complex or moving, and everything becomes static again. So that I got into Chaplin through an academic route, of course, but then I got deeply interested in the work that he does. His films are really affecting, with an A, right? Like they hit you in the feels, so to speak, and they are incredibly funny. And it's a humor that it's wild. A film like City Lights is almost 100 years old. The Gold Rush this year is celebrating its centennial. It was first released in 1925. And you watch them and they feel incredibly contemporary in their concerns about what it is to interact with other people, how it is to interact with technology. The comedy sort of translates it. None of the jokes, or not all of the jokes, feel dated. They are, in fact, because they are themselves coming out of a vaudeville tradition that extends well beyond into the past, into the 19th century. It's really human. The comedy, it is something that, if you've never seen a silent slapstick comedy, and you put one of these on, you will immediately start guffawing, because you've been there too. You've made these faux pas, or it's not just dudes with pies, right? Um, there's a lot more to it. And I am, and I'll close by saying the thing that really got me into Chaplin was all of his films are, sort of melodramatic and bittersweet. This one, has this ending that like sends, I think, everyone to tears. It's a really like challenging, beautiful, memorable ending, with some like complex emotions. Um, but what I like about Chaplin's stuff is that there is an optimism to all of it. There's I call it a radical optimism, where in the face of sort of all of the abject terror of the first half of the 20th century. This is a film that comes out in 1931, so we're a couple of years into the Great Depression. Millions of Americans are out of work. His follow-up film, Modern Times, is also addressing the Depression. And then the follow-up to that, The Great Dictator from 1940, is about World War II, and specifically the rise of fascism and the Holocaust. But these films and the characters are never bogged down by the situation, the circumstances. Sure, they are affected by it, they are impacted by it, but ultimately it's always about finding a way to imagine an alternative future for themselves in a way that capitalizes their happiness. And I think that's a really powerful message, especially in a moment like today, but certainly any kind of moment, to recognize our ability to create our own happiness, even when stuff is hard, is really critical. That is a life skill, and you can get that through 90 minutes of sort of pure joy.
Yeah. Oh man. Okay. There was so much good stuff there. Um, the the first question that I want to ask based on what you said, and this is something that I bring up every time we talk about a silent movie on the show, is I still hold the belief that every year there should be like 10 to 12, maybe 15 like pretty big studio silent films that are made, and like every modern director should at some point make a silent movie. Like, would you not love to see like Paul Thomas Anderson take a crack at making a silent movie, or like I don't like Jordan Peele, Greta Gerwig, like Ari Aster, like all of these like contemporary filmmakers? Like,
Sure.
let's all have them try to make silent movies. I think as like movie fans, we would appreciate the art form a lot more and everything that it's capable of, and like not just look at it as like a very like literature adjacent kind of text, which I feel like a lot of the ways that we've watched movies over the last like
Hmm.
40-ish years has just like fallen into that, and we forget that like this is an audio visual medium that has like a lot of capabilities and like a lot of different art forms working within it,
Yeah.
not just like, writing a captivating narrative, you know? Uh, um, but Chaplin is like a perfect example of that, right? Like so much of this and so many of his movies and, particularly City Lights, it's like using, um, in particular, like the visuals and the technology of what he can do with the camera, what he can do in front of the camera, and all of that stuff to create either these moments of laughter, joy, or melodrama, sometimes mixing all three of them from like moment to moment.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm curious to hear your thoughts about my hot take about contemporary silent films.
No, I love it. I think that I think you're totally right. One of the reasons why I love silent cinema is because for contemporary viewers, we have to retrain ourselves with how we interact with the movies. You I think our current um, moment is one in which we are often looking at movies as content delivery devices. Our serialized understanding of what a movie is as part one of a 2-part or 20-part sort of epic. And to be clear, like that goes to the silent era. Like
Mhm.
serials are some of the first big movies we have these long running serials that run for years and years in the silent era. So like that's not necessarily new, but the way that we engage with them culturally, I think, has shifted in a way that you're describing, where we're not necessarily watching them with our eyes first. We are engaging with them at like a different intellectual level, and so silent cinema sort of forces you to strip it all away and engage with only what is before you in a really like simple way. And this is one of the things that Chaplin is brilliant with. It is all of his films, but City Lights in particular. It, um, they're constructed with simplicity and with purity of narrative, of image, of sound in this one in mind. And it creates a really delightful viewing experience because it is different from the way that I would sit down. I saw the Looney Tunes movie yesterday, the day the Earth blew up, and it's a different sort of experience than a movie like this.
Yeah. The the other thing I think about Chaplin and what you were saying about him, and this movie in particular is like that radical optimism, which I love
Yeah.
that. That's such a beautiful way to put his movies because I do think a movie like City Lights is so uh like I want to say universal, but like I guess it's more of like a timelessness because
Mhm.
the sort of issues, whether it be on a micro or like macro level, are pretty consistent and have been pretty consistent over the almost 100-year span since the movie came out. Like in a lot of ways, like today's society reflects the society within that Chaplin was like making this movie within.
Mhm. Mhm.
So to keep like that radical optimism in mind is really interesting. And then like in particular, like I feel like a lot of the movies with the tramp character
Mhm.
offer that, and like that character itself is a form of radical optimism. I don't know if you had anything else for us like about sort of like how you came up with that and like how it's operating specifically within City Lights, but I would be curious to hear.
Sure. Yeah, the tramp, or the little fellow, as Chaplin would call him, is he's a fascinating character because he mirrors the early part of cinema history. So Chaplin makes I don't have the number. I should have gotten the number in front of me before we started this, but
Yeah, it's pretty
Chaplin
messed up that you don't have it. I think everyone's judging you for it.
Chaplin makes something like 80 films. I think, it's like 77 or 81 or something, throughout his life. And the vast majority of them, like fully 90% of them are shorter films, that happen sometime between 1915 and 1923, when he starts making um, full 9 reel features. That's when he releases A Woman of Paris, his first like sort of true feature film. And so then he only makes like 12 movies after that, between 1923 and he dies in 1977. So he's like, has this huge amount of output. And, in 1915, he's releasing like a movie every other week.
Mhm.
Features, but they range from 1 to 3 reels, so anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes, for the non film academics who are listening. Um, that's how we
Real equals, how would you
Yeah. um, and in most of those, Chaplin is creating this figure of the tramp who, so we're all kind of familiar with. If you've never seen a Charlie Chaplin movie, and many people haven't, you
Mhm,
can still show them a photo of the tramp, and they would know Charlie Chaplin, and they would sort of have an idea of who it is. He's like, as a cultural icon, it's sort of, I think the things that come close are like Darth Vader, right?
yeah.
Sort of anybody can like identify, even if you're one of the few who haven't seen a Star Wars film, you're like aware of the presence of Darth
Y
Vader.
yeah.
Charlie Chaplin is like that, and Charlie Chaplin, in the teens, is a global icon. There's a phenomenon that they dubbed contemporarily called Chaplinitis, and it's sort of like it presages Beatlemania, right? Where literally all over the world, people are like in love with Charlie Chaplin, but specifically with the Tramp.
Mhm,
And so the character is interesting because the character sort of changes over time. He's initially a little bit more like anarchical in
mhm,
the way that he interacts with everything. He sort of causes chaos in a way that he sort of starts shifting away from in the late teens and early 20s. And then by the time we get to City Lights, he has sort of become this like extra figure. It's almost like an empty vessel where you
mhm.
can load whatever you need into the figure of the tramp, and make the tramp the thing that you want. And Chaplin does that, where he's always sort of always in this get up, but not every film is he actually, quote unquote, the character of the tramp. He might be,
Yeah.
oftentimes he's a factory worker, I think is what he's credited as. But like nominally, he's the tramp. Um, and so the optimism, I think, comes from creating this character that is perpetually on the move. He's like a flaneur. He is somebody who just walks, and
Mhm,
he sort of comes in to a situation, and he observes the situation. He creates some kind of change, whether that's more chaotic or not. uh,
mhm.
and so it's like every film he kind of falls in love with somebody in some way, shape, or form. And then he leaves, and then he sort of goes off and rides into the sunset. He sort of walks at the end of the circus, which is 1928. He famously walks off into the sunset. In the next film, Modern Times, he walks into the sunrise.
Mm,
Or sort of always walking away from the camera and away from the situation. Um,
yeah.
and I think, like, for me, the optimism comes out of that ability to see, to critique everything that's going on, to see these disparities in wealth, or the effects of the depression, to see the effects of labor and capital, but then to choose to continue the adventure. And
Yeah.
he's always met with like people who are at the lowest of lows. So in City Lights, we have this millionaire character who's this like mercurial millionaire who is super happy and fun to be around when he's drunk, and then when he's sober, he's a completely different person. This sort of Jekyll and Hyde figure.
Yeah.
But
We've all
we
met
like,
millionaires like that.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
But we meet the millionaire when the millionaire is attempting suicide. So the millionaire comes down. He's by like a canal, and he comes down a set of stairs with his suitcase, and inside his suitcase is a big rock and a rope. Right, he's going to tie the rope around his neck, throw the rock in, and drown himself.
One minor detail, sorry to cut you off, but
No,
like
please.
the idea, it's so funny, the idea of carrying the rock in a suitcase.
Right? Like
Such a
that's
like
comedy.
great touch. Yeah, that is like that's perfect comedy. So, sorry to cut you
No, no,
off.
no. I mean, I'm glad you stopped me because this is like for a lot of people, silent comedy feels like cartoons. And it's
Mhm.
because cartoons are based on silent comedy. So like all of our relationship with like a Daffy Duck or a Bugs Bunny opening up a suitcase and having a bunch of stuff in it, that doesn't come from cartoons. That comes from comedians like Charlie Chaplin or Buster Keaton or Harold Lloyd. But so the millionaire is attempting suicide, is going to try to kill himself, and sort of in walks the tramp, right? And the tramp sort of sees the problem and is like, oh, like we can stop this. You don't need whatever ails you. You don't need to do it.
Mhm.
And it's important, right? Like the tramp doesn't know the guy's a millionaire at this point, but the tramp sort of knows. Well, I'm on the outside of society. Like my nobody's life could be worse than mine. I have nowhere to go. I have no prospects. I don't have a job. I don't have anybody sort of around me. So for him to be optimistic is a really powerful thing. And then of course he sort of intervenes and he ends up with the rope around his neck and he goes into the river. But that's how these two characters meet. And then throughout the film, they go on sort of little adventures together when the millionaire
Mhm.
is drunk. And then they wake up in the morning and the millionaire has no recollection of anything that's happened. And it is a beautiful friendship.
Yeah. Maybe not beautiful, but it is there are moments of beauty within the friendship, and it's,
Sure.
yeah, there's, maybe not millionaires, but everyone's probably had a similar kind of relationship or friendship with someone where
Yeah.
where it's like,
Yeah.
you know, I, again, I don't know that that's necessarily like the reading of the movie that we should have of like, like your college buddies who you only see when you're drinking or whatever. Like there's I think there's a little bit more depth to what Chaplin was doing with that character, but hilarious nonetheless. The other thing that you mentioned that I wanted to sort of circle back to was kind of like the simplicity of like the narrative, and I think you also said the form of the movie, which yes, there is some simplicity in the form, but I also think that Chaplin does not get enough credit as a like director or auteur for what he's able to
Mhm.
do.
Mhm.
Also, just like silent film in general, there's a lot more weight on like what it is that you're doing with the camera and like visual storytelling, because you can't just be like, this character is sad, or like I am sad because you left me over here, or like I don't want you to commit suicide because you are my friend, like when we rely on like that dialogue, we just like we you don't have to worry about the visuals.
Yeah.
But curious to hear a little bit more about sort of like the simplicity of the narrative and of the form of the filmmaking that like still makes it super effective.
Yeah, no, you are first off, you're totally correct. Chaplin does not get enough credit. I think it's one of the reasons why I have become the Chaplin guy.
Mhm.
Is because sort of everyone acknowledges his importance. He's an incredibly important figure, but because he's in the movies, everybody sort of glosses over the parts where he wrote, produced, directed, edited, and composed them. Right, like
Yeah.
no one else.
Composing is the part that I think a lot of people like miss and like don't know that like he was composing,
Yeah.
scores for most, if not all of his movies, which
Yep.
is an insane thing to do.
It's wild. It's wild. I mean, a true sort of polymath.
Yeah.
Um, And really, when you use the word auteur, and we live sort of in a like post-auteur theory uh, cultural um, milieu. Oh my god, I sound like an academic. So like we live in a film culture in which we all sort of think about the auteur, whether or not we
Hmm.
ascribe a level of like greatness to the director. All of our film culture is informed by sort of this body of work that we call auteur theory.
Hmm.
Um, uh, and we sort of like gloss over Chaplin, even though he is the guy who, out of any of the directors, out of Marty or Stevie Spielberg or William Wyler or sort of name anybody, right?
Yeah.
Um, Nobody has as much control as Charlie Chaplin does. And he owns the distribution company as well, right? He
Yeah.
founds United Artists. So not only does he own the studio that produces it, the Chaplin studio, but he controls distribution for it, and he's writing and casting and editing, and he's doing all the stuff. So like this is the auteur. Um, anyway, to get to like questions of simplicity and form, yeah, I mean, I think this is a film that it's really about purity, and you can see that in the way the narrative is constructed. So for those who haven't watched it yet, the narrative is quite simple. The tramp meets a blind girl who is selling flowers, and she mistakes the tramp for a millionaire. A man walks by and shuts a car door, so he must have money. She hears the car door,
Hmm.
but she can't see anybody. And then at the same time, the tramp meets an actual millionaire, and sort of has these little adventures and comes into money, but he has this budding romance with this blind girl, and stuff happens. Comedy ensues, and the tramp is able to get some money. He gives it to the blind girl, who is able to have an operation to restore her eyesight, and then she can finally see who her benefactor is, and realize it is not a millionaire, but sort of down
Hmm.
and out guy. That's the story. It's a simple story. It's like a meet cute, girl meets boy. There's some dancing sequences. There's some funny hijinks. There's some cops doing funny stuff. But that's it, right? Like that's the movie. So like just at the level of narrative, this is a really pared back film. But then in terms of form, it is also sort of pared back or pure. And I think one of the reasons why Chaplin gets does not get enough credit as a director is because he's not showy. He's not interested in doing, sort of these big grandiose shots, or using shadows in sort of, very effective ways. And it's not because he's not a good director, but it's because it's not necessary.
Hmm.
Everything
Yeah.
you need in this story and in these images are contained in their faces, is contained in the body language, is contained in the situation. So you don't need the other stuff. And so you don't need, like a lot of tracking shots. There are a couple push-ins, which are rare for a Chaplin film. There's a sequence in a nightclub. Him and the
Hmm.
millionaire go out and they have some like late night drunken food, and there's like a sort of tracking push in with them, and that's kind of rare for Chaplin. Famously, his camera is like pretty static. He shoots everything as he would have in 1915 as a slapstick comedian, where you want a medium or a wide shot because you want to see the people and the situation
Yeah.
develop. And so he doesn't like put a lot of frills into things. But you are correct. If we mistake frilliness for greatness, we're losing a whole aspect of our visual language, and we're losing out on an entire heritage of not only filmmaking but of comedy making, that is really important.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just to kind of like maybe make a comparison to something that people might be more familiar with, like a lot of like modern action movies will really highlight the this is a single take or we're just doing a wide shot so you can see like the stunt work that is going into
Mhm.
making this like action sequence work. It's kind of the same thought with Chaplin. Like it might not necessarily be an action sequence, but you are getting this like opportunity to really see and visualize like the greatness of the performance and the like stage design, the stage direction that's
Mhm.
happening like within a given gag or bit, which if we can appreciate that in a John Wick movie, we can also appreciate that in City Lights, you know?
Absolutely. Well, and then you can see, and this is again why I love this kind of stuff, because then you can see the heritage,
Mhm.
and then this stuff isn't unfamiliar. It's no longer alien, and it makes the John Wick movie or sort of insert any contemporary film that much more meaningful because you understand where it all comes from, what's
Yeah.
origins of a lot of this stuff are.
Let's say the buzzword. Let's say the buzzword. All of these movies are in conversation with each other.
They are in conversation with each other. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, there's someone out there who just had to take a shot. Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. Um, okay, speaking of bits and gags and sort of like the form that Chaplin is utilizing for making this movie, is there one in particular within City Lights, one sort of bit that stands out to you in particular? Is there one that is like your favorite? I'm also just curious, like your actually, we'll get to that question later.
Okay.
What's the one bit that really like stood out to you?
Yeah. So there is one bit that I come back to all the time. It just sends me howling. And the bit for me is a minor one, but it is so the millionaire and the tramp, they're out having the time of their lives. They go to this nightclub. They sort of play musical chairs. There's not enough chairs at the table, so they're
Yeah.
constantly stealing chairs from other tables. And sober people are like kind of falling down because their chairs have gone missing, and everyone's kind of getting pissed off and ready to fight each other. And anyway, they finally sit down, and they're handed plates of spaghetti. And at the same time, everyone around them has streamers and they're throwing streamers. And so all of a sudden, the background is just full of these great, big curls of streamer. And Chaplin's tramp is cutting up his spaghetti, and he puts a noodle in his mouth, and there's this great slide whistle effect as the noodle goes whoop right up in, and
Yeah.
he does it again, and he does it again, and then he gets the next noodle, but this one isn't a noodle, it's one of the streamers, and it's coming down curled down from the ceiling, and he just keeps eating it. And it's like it's this just great bit of comedy because at first he's eating it and he's like, well, this is a long noodle, right? Like you can
Yeah.
see the calculations happening, and then
The
he
raised
makes
eyebrows, yeah.
and he makes eye contact with the noodle, which is at eye level, and there's like a furrow in his eyebrow, and he's like, "Well, where is this noodle coming from?" And then he looks up and he sees this noodle going all the way to the top of the frame, and as he's chewing it, he has to follow the noodle, right? So he's like just taking on more and more noodle and rising in his seat, and it's so silly and ridiculous. I absolutely love it because it goes on. One of Chaplin's things he's sort of famous for is he said that I can make a movie, I can make the same comedy as anybody else, but I do everything three times, and that's what makes it funny.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying like that's not a direct quote. This is a a vibe based quote.
Yeah.
It's not a rule of thirds thing he's saying, but rather
Mhm.
he's sort of saying that if you do it again and you do it again, or you expand the length of it, that's actually where the comedy comes from, right? There's the situation in and of itself, which is funny. Eating the
Yeah.
streamer, that's funny. But what's really funny is for it to keep going. And then the comedy like converts. Then the comedy is no longer just about the situation, but the comedy is about us in the audience and the movie as a construction,
Mhm.
and making us sit through it. Surely this person would know at this point, what are we doing here? You want to yell back at the screen, and that's
Yeah.
so much fun. Like all of a sudden you are experiencing the movie in a completely different way, and it's intentional in its construction, and I love that. That's movie magic.
It's so much fun. It's kind of similar with the bit with the elevator shaft where he
Yes,
goes back and forth maybe like 4 or 5 times, and it's
precisely right.
because we just keep repeating the same joke, that's where the humor comes in, but then once we've done it, that 4th or 5th time, then someone else comes up, and then, like, that's where the joke then gets taken to sort of, like, the next level.
Yep.
So it's like, you have the setup, then you have, like, prolonging the joke, and then you have this, like, additional punchline. It's absolutely incredible. His,
Yeah.
again, just, like, sort of, like, stripping everything away from like, it's funny when, like, someone makes a fart noise, like, that will to me, that will
Sure.
always be funny, but
Sure.
we lose so much of, like, what we're able to do with humor when we're not making silent movies, Like,
Yeah.
the humor here is obviously it's timeless, it's universal. Um, there's also universality to silent movies that a
Mhm.
lot of dialogue-based films don't have because you're just swapping out a couple of title cards into different languages. So, like, cinema was a much more, like, universal experience
Mhm.
when Chaplin was making these movies. Like, this could be seen in every corner of the globe, as long as they had projection reels, and, like, people can laugh at the same things because there's no inhibitor of, like, the language barrier or whatever.
Yeah.
Some of the, you know, thematic elements might be sort of, like, unique to American culture, but not so much that, like, someone watching, like, all across Europe couldn't view this movie and, like, understand what's going on,
Yeah.
which is a beautiful thing to me. Yeah.
No, no, it is beautiful, and in fact, it's one of the reasons why. So this movie comes out in 1931, which is a few years after the transition to sound starts, right? So 1926, we get a couple Vitaphone features that are forgotten,
Mhm,
and they have like music sections, so they don't have dialogue. And in fact, Charlie Chaplin's brother Sidney is in one of these movies in 1926. But then in 1927, we get The Jazz Singer, which is the first movie that has sort of dialogue interspersed with it. It's nominally a silent film. It has title cards. Most of the feature is silent, but you have these bits and pieces of both music and talking, and
mhm,
that changes everything. And it takes about a year and a half because every movie theater in America, let alone the globe, has to transition their technology, right? Like you can't just
mhm.
put on one of these new movies with a soundtrack if you don't have speakers in your
Yeah.
theater, right? So it's a sort of massive thing. But after about a year and a half, every movie theater, give or take, the big ones in sort
Mhm,
of urban areas transition to sound. But Chaplin was really concerned about universality. And in fact, in 1929, when they started making the movie, he was committed to making. He initially thought we're going to make one for domestic audiences that will be a sound picture, and we'll
mhm.
make one for international audiences that will be silent. And it's because he's concerned about language. All of a sudden you can't export your film, to France, if it's only in English.
Yeah.
We're not dubbing movies at this point, so it's a totally different like mediascape. And eventually he sort of comes to the decision that no, I'm just going to make it like silent, basically. Um,
Mhm.
and so instead of it being a fully silent film, we have the synchronized soundtrack that includes little bits of diegetic sound. You have famously, your fart comment reminded me of it. We have the moment where he swallows a whistle in the
Mhm.
middle of a performance, and he keeps hiccuping because he's been drinking, but the hiccup is a whistle. So like that's a diegetic sound, a sound that occurs in the movie universe. And then you
The
have like
D word, another buzzword. We're, uh, we're we're crushing it for the Canon drinking game today.
hell yeah. um, and then you have the recorded score. But that in itself is like an act of rebellion,
Yeah.
because everybody else is making talking movies at this point. We're 4
Well,
years in.
there's a bit of like poking fun at talkies in the opening scene,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Where they're like unveiling the new statue or whatever, and the mayor is speaking, but all that we're hearing is like this like I don't know what instrument it is, but the subtitles, the version that I was watching just said quacking, which was hilarious, right? But like this really really funny bit and kind of like fu moment at the beginning of the movie to the idea of talkies, where the first character that we have speaking in the movie is not making any actual, is not speaking any actual language. They're just making these silly noises,
Yeah.
which I thought that's like a brilliant way when you have the context of like what he is doing in rebellion against talkies.
Hmm.
That opening scene becomes so much funnier.
So funny. Yeah, he's what I kind of love about it is it's Charlie Chaplin's voice making these noises. So he's like using probably a kazoo or a saxophone
Mhm.
mouthpiece is what I've read. But you get this sort of like Charlie Brown kind of sound.
Yeah.
And it's great because it's like it is both saying, the dialogue doesn't matter. We don't need to know what these people are saying, but it's also making fun of the sound of movies at that time, because the sound technology itself is not very sophisticated. So watching movies, you get these really tinny sounds, especially because movie theaters at this moment. This is another one of the areas where I do a lot of my research and study is
Mhm.
the history of movie theaters. Movie theaters at that moment are huge for the most part. So, you're in a 2,200 seat like palace, you're watching this movie on like little tinny speakers.
Mhm.
Everything does sound tiny and out of focus and wrong. So he's making like four jokes at one time in this moment. But I also love it because it's Charlie's voice. So the first voice that we hear in the movie, and the first time that any audience ever hears Charlie Chaplin's voice on screen is this bit, where
Yeah.
the voice doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's so good. And then you have the other sort of like obvious joke of we're poking fun at the sort of like power structure or whatever that is existing within the city. Like this mayor, he's a quack. He what he says doesn't matter. What he's doing with the unveiling of the statue doesn't matter. Them being shitty to the tramp, it's all unfounded because like they're all a bunch of dumbasses, and we're expressing that through like them not actually saying anything when giving the speech
Well,
about
yeah,
the
I mean that's
statue. So like there are a few different layers to this like one single joke.
Yeah, I mean it's a salient political critique as well, because you've got like the mayor and these politicians christening a brand new, statue, an art installation, and there's like a man who has no home there, and like the politician's concern is not for the homeless. Their concern is not for the tramp. Their concern is that he's ruining this glorious moment
Yeah.
where they're unveiling this monument to, their culture and themselves.
Yeah.
Uh, so like, yeah, we're
What's the
making
name of the
fun of
statue? Peace and prosperity.
yeah,
Like,
exactly right. Yeah.
like it's all so obvious, but it's like it's so hilarious. Um,
Yep.
and again, like Chaplin doesn't need to be showy, or it doesn't need to be this incredibly like subtle thing in order for it to be smart and effective. Like again, it's a very layered joke. It's a hilarious joke. Um, yeah, all of it is like it's on the nose, but it's all perfect.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is the first movie where this is not the this is one of the first movies where Chaplin is starting to make really pointed political critiques. He's been doing it for a long time. A lot of his short films and silent films, I mean, the character of the tramp itself invites a political critique. Um, but this one is where he's really starting to like sort of sharpen the knife, if you will, the edge of his blade. The year that this movie came out, he told the Wisconsin State Journal that something is wrong. Things have been badly managed when 5 million men are out of work in the richest country in the world. If we continue to view the present condition as inevitable, the whole structure of our civilization may crumble. The present deplorable conditions certainly can't be charged against the 5 million men out of work, ready to work, anxious to work, and yet unable to get jobs. If capital represents the genius of America, it would seem obvious that for our own sake, the present conditions should not continue or ever again be repeated. And I mean, that's exactly what's going on in this opening scene where the tramp is waking up after sleeping outside all night long, and instead of somebody like offering him food or clothing or a shower, they're telling him to get out of the way because he's ruining the photo op.
Yeah, exactly. It's it's also like terrifying how still relevant it feels. And again, like this was also something that was probably being felt across the globe at the time, has been felt across the globe for the 90 plus years since this movie's like initial release, which is why something like this is essential, right? Like this is a
Yeah.
movie that anyone from like anywhere can come to at any time, and not only can we enjoy the like brilliance of Chaplin as a performer, the brilliance of Chaplin as a director, but also the like thematic weight of a lot of the things that he was tackling and just like the relevance that it continues to have throughout time. I think I'm pretty sure Modern Times is also in the canon, but between like I think these might be the only three that I've seen too, but between City Lights, The Gold Rush, and that movie, I think his like thoughts on just like society and the ills of society are like pretty clear.
Yep.
Um, and again, you can watch all of those movies and just have the takeaway that like he was an amazing performer. That's
Yep.
totally cool. But there is a lot more that's going on. I think one of the again like very obvious but interesting thematic elements of this movie is the whole like the through line of the tramp not being like seen for who he is, whether it be
Mhm.
literally not being seen by the blind woman or the like misconceptions of who he is or not being seen as he like actually is by the you know uh the blind drunk man, the blind drunk millionaire.
Mhm.
Like what do you think of the relationship between like those two characters and like their relationship to the tramp and just like not seeing him and maybe someone like the tramp in society, maybe they're not being fully seen the way that they should be either.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just started a really great dissertation, right? Like that is you're totally right. This is one of the themes that he's tackling here, and doing it by introducing both like the literal blindness of this blind girl, um, and having a character like the millionaire who has wealth and power and prosperity, but can't see it because of his own depression, and also can't
Mhm.
see it because he is so mercurial that he is a different person entirely, depending on how much alcohol he's consumed. And yeah, the tramp is a figure that exists at the fringes. He walks into these scenes. So the character, I think it's again one of the reasons why this character is so compelling, and continues to give us great joy and satisfaction in watching, because it's somebody that we can all identify with. We've all sort of felt like we're the outsider at some point. Um, uh, we also identify people in our lives who maybe we feel are the outsider, but we can also extrapolate that to sort of our greater worldview, and think about who today, in our towns or cities or nations, are the people that are being intentionally kept on the outside. How do they interact with us? How do we interact with them? So it's a tight 90-minute comedy, but he's doing a lot here. He's making some
Yeah.
really interesting questions happen. But the whole time you're enthralled and sort of just like laughing. It's only when you sit back and sort of say, well, what the hell did I just see? That you realize that there's something really deep and meaningful and complex going
Mhm.
on. It's about individuals and about society. And like, whoa, gosh, that's a great movie. If 100 years later, we're still like wondering about, what it can tell us about our world.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that I feel like a another movie, right, would focus more so on the tramp's desires to be
Mm,
seen because that is a very like natural human feeling that we all have. We all, desire that other people see us for, whatever whoever it is that we like think that we are and or might be and all that good stuff. But instead of that, he just like the tramp never comes across as someone who is like pining for or like searching for someone to see him. He is just like existing and he is happy to see others and like help them where they need it and not so
mhm.
much like looking for a way for people to help him, which I think is like a really, really, really interesting way to approach that. And I don't know that like many directors besides Chaplin could like accomplish that. And I think it's like because of what we know the tramp figure to sort of like be throughout all of the movies that like he's able to accomplish that. I don't know if that's something that you agree with or if I'm like, if I sound like a crazy person.
No, not at all. No, I mean, I'm kind of interested by the notion that there are few directors or filmmakers who can do this, and
Mhm.
I sort of tend to agree. And I think it's important to think about Charlie Chaplin's life because it informs his work. So, Charlie Chaplin was born in London in 1889. And he was born sort of in like the classic Victorian Dickensian kind of
Mhm.
London that we think of on the outside as Americans, where
Yeah.
by the age of 6 he's in a workhouse because his mother is committed to sanitariums throughout his childhood. He's separated from his brother, so I mean he's like a true like orphan in like
Yeah.
the most classic sense. Um, uh, culturally.
Mhm.
He's in the workhouse. It's exactly what you think it is. Um,
Yeah. It's
and
interesting that his, like and sorry to cut you
no,
off,
no,
but
no,
that
please.
his, like, early life was, like, so British because you watch his movies and, like, they all feel so American.
Yeah.
He feels like an American figure, like a purely just pure Americana in every sense of the word, but sorry, keep going.
No, no. Well, I mean, actually, I'm glad you said that because it relates to the sort of universality we were talking about a bit ago. One of the reasons why Chaplin was worried about transitioning to sound was, well, what should the tramp sound like?
Mhm.
If he's an American figure, as it seems to be the case that he is, and then he opens his mouth and he has a British accent, that's gonna be shocking, right? Like
Yeah.
that's not what we think. It'd be like we've never heard Darth Vader's voice, and then we hear it, and it's just David Prowse's voice and not James Earl Jones. You'd be like, what the hell was that? Like that's not the voice,
Yeah.
and that
It's like when
is
I found out that Florence Pugh and Andrew Garfield were both British.
right. You're like, what are you talking about? That
Yeah.
can't possibly be the
It can't
case.
be. Yeah, I guess for most people,
Um,
that'd probably be like Christian Bale. They're like, what do you mean
what do you mean?
he's
Yeah,
from the Isles?"
everyone is British. They just all do great American accents. Um, no, so he has a hard upbringing. When he was 14, his mother is recommitted to a mental asylum. He makes his way to the U.S. At 19. So he finally comes to the U.S. at 19 as a vaudeville comedian. And a couple years later, he gets involved with the Keystone Studios in 1914, and from there it takes off. Um, 4 years later, in 1918, he's like one of the highest paid people in the world. And this is again one of the other really interesting things about Chaplin, right? Is that he is both sort of singularly capable of making some of these critiques because of his own life experience.
Mhm.
Not just the critique, but thinking about optimism and sort of getting out of it.
Mhm.
How do we get out of this? But he's also like one of the wealthiest individuals in the world. He's incredibly well taken care of. He's never going to have sort of real world worries. He has a kind of tough life,
Mhm.
in that he's sort of hounded by the press, by the IRS. He's kicked out of the country in the late 1940s. It's sort of the most prominent victim of the blacklist. So it's not necessarily easy for him, but also
Mhm.
you know he's known around the world and has all of this money, and he sort of seems to, I think, at face value, and this is a critique that people make of him at the time, is, well, you've got more in common with the drunken millionaire than you do with the tramp, right?
Mhm.
um, but for Chaplin, and I sort of personally disagree with it. I think we all have much more in common with the working poor than we do with our millionaire counterparts,
Yeah.
and Chaplin included. So he sort of saw the character and the critiques that he was making through like a lens of solidarity,
Mhm.
which is important.
There's also the idea that, like, we all should identify more with the tramp, like, right? Like, even if we're not thinking about it from, like, the, like, class perspective, but just the sort of, like, right, like, what it is that that character is doing versus what it is that the millionaire is doing, where the millionaire is not seeing this person for who he is and all of that stuff, and, like, not appreciating him, when he's sober and, seeing him through clearer eyes, so to
Hmm.
speak.
Hmm.
But that we all should be more like the tramp, and that we should, like, extend that grace to other people despite whatever circumstances it is that that we're under. And, like, he is never like a selfish character. He's never like just looking out for himself. He only operates with, like, grace and dignity for, like, other people, which, he has every right, more than, like, any other character in this movie, like, and a lot of, like, movie characters in general, like, a lot of people in general, like, he
Uh-huh.
has every right to be, like, as selfish as possible. Like, at every turn, he is just getting, like, screwed over again and again, whether it be the people, at the statue unveiling at the beginning, or, like, just, like, through, like, a misunderstanding, getting kind of screwed over, like, in the boxing match, right? Which is a great scene. Criminal that we haven't brought it up until now, but
Yeah.
he has sort of every right to be, like, angry at the world, to be mean to people, to be very self-centered in, like, what it is that he does and how he operates. But no, he's, like, extremely kind to the millionaire, always very helpful. He helps him out, very kind to the blind woman. Um, Obviously, part of that is because he loves her, but, like, he never operates in his own self-interest outside of just, like, well, not even, like, trying to get her to love him. He just, like, wants to help her out. It's never
Yeah.
for a selfish reason, which I think, again, that is something that we can all take lessons from.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're completely right. Like, look at what he does when he has access to money. He gives it to the blind girl. And sort of as an aside, the character's name is the blind girl. So,
Yeah.
we're not like not naming these characters. This is part of
Yeah,
the
that blind
simplicity.
lady over there, yeah.
Um, but yeah, like this is a guy who, when he finally gets some money from the millionaire, he could take it and like go get that home over his head. But he sees somebody else in need, and he does it sort of, out of obviously he loves her, but he gives her the money, and then the sort of hopes for the best. And when he meets her again in the final moments of the film, he doesn't say, well, hey, I'm the mysterious benefactor. I'm the person who's helped you. She's at the end of the film. She's had this operation, it restores her eyesight, and she's opened up a flower shop. And it looks like it's a very prosperous
Mhm.
flower shop. It's making money. It's
Perhaps peaceful
beautiful.
too.
Yeah. And he sees her through the window, and she kind of makes fun of him a little bit. She sees this dirty tramp outside the window looking at the flowers, and she kind of laughs, and she invites him over to give him a flower. And it's then when she doesn't recognize him visually, but she touches him, and she has this moment. But he doesn't say anything. He doesn't say, you know, uh, I'm the person. And like that in itself is such a selfless act. I mean, it's one of the reasons why it is beautiful, because she recognizes it and he recognizes her recognizing it. But you also have in the final shot of the film.
Mhm.
So if you're listening and you haven't watched it, stop the podcast, go watch the movie, and return to us in 90 minutes.
Yeah.
But you have this moment of recognition on both of their faces, and it's there are so many emotions going through their eyes. It's a scene that is sort of beautiful because they finally do see each other, but it's heartbreaking because you also know in that moment that they can't be together. She can't be with him for a variety of reasons. Maybe she doesn't want to be with him.
Oh, interesting.
So you feel a heartbreak because these characters must sort of be wrested apart at that moment of sort of profound joy. It's again, this is a complex movie where it's doing sort of two things always at once. It's sort of giving us light comedy and deep
Mhm.
pathos at exactly the same time. And in these their faces is sort of a back and forth two shot setup. It's joy and sadness all mixed up together at one moment. And then Iris out and the movie ends.
Can you talk to me a little bit more about why you think that they cannot be together? Because that was not my reading,
Oh
and
yeah.
I'm wondering if I totally misread the movie. Might just be based on, sort of like years of being conditioned by various romantic comedies that sort of ending means, and then they ended up together happily ever after. But I'm really, really curious to hear why it is that you're saying that they won't be able to be together for whatever the
Sure.
reason might be.
Well, let me ask. So your reading is they've recognized each other and they're gonna sort of make a life together or something.
Love conquers all. We can
Yeah.
figure out anything through our deep love for each other that we are just now realizing.
Well, I think uh, that's great. Look, this
It's a
is a
very
beautiful.
Sleepless in Seattle kind of reading of the ending. Like we finally have had our proper meet cute, and that's that. Things are going to be amazing moving forward.
No, I think, look, like almost all readings of movies are valid, right? Like if you can locate it in the image, this is what as an academic, like if I put
Yeah.
my professor hat on, when I am talking to people about how to read movies, I say, if you can find it in the image, then it's there, right? All you have to do is back it up. So if that's your reading, that's a great reading and a valid reading. I think I am looking at it partially because I'm so familiar with the tramp as a character. The tramp cannot be with anybody. He's like
Hmm.
Batman or James Bond. It will never work out. There must always be a next adventure or person.
Hmm.
So even if it's momentarily happy, it can't be in the long run. But I think to me, I read um, a sadness in both of them because um, she has finally got her life together. So throughout the film, she's living with her grandmother. They owe back rent. This is another area where the tramp selflessly, helps her out.
Yeah, a whopping
Um,
$22 in back rent.
Yeah, but it's like 400. I did the math. It's $400
Yeah.
today. So I don't know. I thought it was great. There's a
No,
bit
just
where he buys flowers and he gives her a $10 bill and she's like, "Oh my
yeah,
god,"
yeah.
um, but like they can't be together because she is now in a different station. She's finally successful, and he's not. Actually, I've got a bit from a 1950 essay by the film critic James A.G. That I think really informs me. So I'm going to read a little bit of it. So A.G. writes, at the end of City Lights, the blind girl who has regained her sight thanks to the tramp sees him for the first time. She's imagined and anticipated him as princely, to say the least, and it never seriously occurred to him that he is inadequate. She recognizes who he must be by his shy, confident, shining joy as he comes silently towards her, and he recognizes himself for the first time through the terrible changes in her face. The camera just exchanges a few quiet close-ups of the emotions which shift and intensify in each face. It is enough to shrivel the heart to see, and it is the greatest piece of acting and the highest moment in movies. So there's a lot that AG is telling us here, but I think it's the bit about not recognizing himself that is the most heartbreaking for me. That he hasn't seriously considered the fact that they can't be together. But then he must recognize that they can't, because she sees him and she does react, and it's not necessarily a like, wow, I'm in love with you, I know who you are, you did the right thing for me. It's like it's a shock that the person who has helped her is this guy. It's not the person she imagined, and him recognizing that, ooh, that's the hard part. But
Paul, you're breaking my heart here. That was,
it's look, again, if you haven't watched the movie, stop the podcast, get to the end. You are going to be in tears. It is. It's impossible not to cry some kind of tear, whether it is a joyous, happy ending tear or a shriveled heart, sad tear.
I needed that hope today. I needed that hope for love today. But it makes. I mean, yeah, it does make a lot of sense for like the movie, for the tramp character as a whole, for that to be the reading of the ending, and it's making me reconsider those last two title cards of "You can see?" question mark, and then her saying "I can see," and again having the weight of just their faces say it, and not having to rely. Right, if this were a talkie, we would rely solely on the delivery of that line to understand everything, and not so much the like subtleties of their facial expressions, which apparently I did not pick up on because I was hopeful for something else. But again, that's like that. Yeah, that is the beauty and like the perfection of silent filmmaking, and like how insanely powerful it can be when we don't have the tool of like dialogue to just fall back on, so to speak.
We live our entire lives in our bodies, and we read the world through our bodies, right? Our body is the only way through which we experience anything. It's through our senses. I think in sort of Western culture in particular, but sort of contemporary culture, we separate our mind and body quite a bit. And we sort of think that like our minds are there and our body just kind of facilitates the mind. But that's not necessarily the case. And this is why I love silent movies. You're touching on it exactly, because it forces you to consider your body. It forces you to consider, how do I express my world through my body? It's a huge part of our lives, and we would all be much better off, young men in particular, if they would like figure out their bodies and figure out the ways that they can use their bodies to express themselves. And silent movies really help you make that proprioceptive mind-body connection in a way that dialogue-driven narrative film can, but not necessarily does.
It's easier to get lost in dialogue heavy films, in terms of not relying on everything else that's there, whether it be the body or a simple edit um or a push in with the camera to like that can tell the whole story, right? A push in, a tracking shot,
Hmm.
a two radically different images like appearing one after the other on screen. Like all these things can tell us the same things that like a line of dialogue would otherwise tell us.
Yep. Yep.
Um, which is why going back to my theory that like we should have 10 to 15 silent movies each year is it would reteach us how to like watch movies, and it would reteach directors how to make movies, you
I
know.
look, I'm co-signing this statement. I think I absolutely agree. We should get 10 to 15 silents a year in movie theaters.
Yeah, in movie theaters. It would be such a lovely experience. I may be a little too hopeful that that could be a thing that would happen because people won't even go to the movie theaters to see like a new Bong Joon Ho or Steven
Sure.
Soderbergh movie. you know, so like if they're not going to do that, then they're certainly not going to see Bong Joon Ho's latest silent film.
Do you want some optimism on that? I have an
Yeah,
off-topic, optimistic
yeah,
response to that.
please.
Um, this comes directly from my research. Americans see on average 4 movies a year, something like 3.75.
Hmm.
That number has held static since 1948.
Okay.
So we talk all the time about none of us are seeing enough movies.
Yeah.
But the reality is everyone's seeing about 4 movies a year. There are some of us like me, I'm going to see 4 this week. There are others who see 1 a year on Christmas Day with their families because they're being forced to, and it's something to do that isn't talking to their family, right? But on average, Americans are seeing the same amount of movies that they saw in 1950, in 1960, in 1970. So yes, the industry like has concerns. Yes, we want more people to see more movies, and
Mhm.
certainly I would love more movies in movie theaters. But we don't necessarily need to be as concerned as the headlines would like us to be.
Brilliant. I appreciate that. That's you brought me back. First, you broke my heart a couple minutes ago, and now you're giving me hope again. So
Radical
this is
optimism, baby.
this this is good. I'm happy that we got to the ending because there is like so much that's happening there. This is like maybe one of the best cinematic endings that we have out there. It might be recency bias, but it feels like there's not a lot out there that like perfectly wraps up what an entire movie's identity and like thesis sort of is
Yeah,
uh, better than this one. So
it's
I'm
a
happy that we got
perfect
there.
button.
Yeah, absolutely perfect. Um, was there anything else, Paul, that you wanted to talk about that we maybe haven't gotten to?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think we're having we haven't talked about the boxing match,
Yeah, I think people
which
will be upset about that.
yeah. I mean, I don't sort of. What do you want to say about the boxing match? What are
I
your
actually don't
thoughts
have
initially?
I don't have much to say about it. I do think it's great. It's like obviously an amazing piece of physical comedy. I do think that there
Mhm.
are better bits even within this movie, and certainly in other Chaplin movies, but
Mhm.
it's great. I get why people, why they love it and why that's sort of like the standout scene from this. There are a few things funnier than like watching Charlie Chaplin uh yeet himself across a boxing ring. That's like an incredible image. So I get it.
Yeeting is like the proper verb as well for that. Like, if he didn't use yeet in his like script notes,
Yeah.
he should have because it's the appropriate word. No, I think number one, I agree. It's a famous bit for a reason.
Mhm.
Um, I think one of the things you said to me a couple weeks ago when we started talking about doing this was, you know, does this movie need to be included in the canon? Well, like, what is the reason why this movie
Mhm.
exists in the cultural canon? And I think the boxing match gives us a helpful part of the answer, and it's because City Lights is the Charlie Chaplin movie that gives any Charlie Chaplin fan or novice the kind of Charlie Chaplin that they want. Because there are many Charlie Chaplins. There is
Mhm.
Charlie Chaplin, the auteur, the director who's making a film like A Woman of Paris, which is a brilliant film from 1923, and is the only film in which Charlie Chaplin does not star.
Hmm.
It's a sort of classic melodrama.
Hmm.
There's Charlie Chaplin, the comedian, but that comedian is the slapstick 1918 comedian, or he is the 1940, critic comedian.
Hmm.
There's Charlie Chaplin, the political theorist, who is thinking about our modern times
Yeah.
and the ails of our societies. Yeah. You like what I did there?
Ah, ah.
Um, but this film offers a little bit of everything to everybody, and not in a sort of grab bag way. But again, this sort of gets to why the Tramp is such an enduring figure, is because the Tramp and Chaplin, the artist, is a cipher on which we can read whatever we want to read. If you are like Charlie Chaplin can be this sort of great leftist. He can be a horrible leftist.
Yeah.
He can be a great filmmaker. He can be an okay filmmaker. He's all there because we can sort of like put what we need into it. And
Hmm.
this film works in the canon because a scene like the boxing scene gives the Chaplin fan who wants just like straight slapstick comedy of people hurling themselves across the room at each other. It gives them that.
Hmm.
It gives us, obviously, as we've said, these sort of salient social and political commentaries in its narrative. It gives us these really beautiful um, uh, aesthetic, authorial sequences and touches. It
Hmm.
gives us this incredible score.
Yeah.
It's absolutely beautiful score.
Yeah.
So it's a film that like you can approach it from any direction, and you're gonna find something to enjoy about it, and not just like you're gonna like it, but like this is a film that's hard not to love. You're like, even if silent movies aren't your bag, it's a
Hmm.
film that is gonna stick with you for the rest of your life.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, had I seen this before? I think I'd maybe seen like part of this, but hadn't seen it all the way through. But this was my first time, um, you know, watching it all the way through. And again, like I said, I am a fan of Chaplin, but I'm not like a huge Chaplin head.
Yeah.
In the way, not in the ways that I would want to be. But do you think if you were like recommending one Chaplin movie to someone who's like just starting their Chaplin journey, would this be the one?
Yeah, I think this is probably the one to start with. It's also the film that I would recommend to anybody who is curious but maybe averse to silent film. Um,
Hmm.
this film is a great. I guess this is something that we haven't really touched on, but because it acts as a bridge from the sound to the talkie era, the silent to the sound era. It's really accessible. It's really
Hmm.
easy to get into. It gives you all of the like aesthetic pleasures of silent cinema. We have intertitles, we have visual gags and visual humor and visual melodrama, but it also has a synchronized soundtrack, so it like exists for a contemporary viewer in the way
Hmm.
that any kind of contemporary movie does. If you grew up watching a Steven Spielberg movie with a John Williams score, you're going to feel like you're at home because it's very Wagnerian in its use of leitmotif and everything. So it's a movie that is really accessible, both for someone who has never experienced a Charlie Chaplin movie before, or somebody who hasn't really seen a lot of silent movies. Maybe you saw one in a film class you took in undergrad. You saw Dr. Caligari, and it was a really bad print and really blurry, and it had like a rock soundtrack on it because you watched it on 2x speed on YouTube. But this is one where you can put it on and you're drawn in, and all of a sudden there's a whole new world of movies that is going to open up to you, and you're going to have 30 years of like just absolute treasure to dig through to see other great silent films.
Yeah, that's. I think you summed it up perfectly. I would probably agree that this is probably the Chaplin movie to start with. Um, I am kind of partial to modern times just because That was the first one that I came across.
Yep.
Similar to you, undergrad,
Yep.
film class. I think maybe in a different context. I forgot the context that you were watching yours in. But yeah, this sort of like is very accessible for anyone, no matter like where you are, sort of in your um, film journey and your silent film journey and your Chaplin journey. And obviously from there, you'll be able to sort of find so much else, which is one of the points of the canon, right? Like these are, if you are, starting your film fandom, if you're a budding cinephile, so to speak, like these are the movies that you need to watch that will then allow you to sort of like graduate into other kinds of movies and like understand like what it is that they're doing. This is like the foundation. So this
Yeah.
is definitely one of those movies that will provide you a foundation. Um, and don't do what I did and come to it too late into your film fandom. Watch it early on. Um, it's great. Well, Paul, thank you so much. This has been an absolute blast.
Thank you.
So much fun talking Chaplin with the number one Chaplin head out there. We should get you a T-shirt that
Oh,
that
I need it.
says
Yeah,
you need it. Yeah,
absolutely.
with like a picture of the tramp on the back.
Yeah.
Amazing. So okay, with all that, I think we can get into the fun stuff. We could do some recommendations for City Lights. Um, you know the deal. We each recommend 3 things for folks to check out. If they like City Lights, at least one of those things has to be another movie. The other 2 things, however, can be any and everything else. It could be a book, an album, a TV show, video game, board game. It could be more movies. The only thing is, we keep it strict 3 and only 3, and any movies that we recommend cannot be in the canon. So, Paul, you'll give your first one, brief explanation, or brief explanation, and then tell us what it is, and then I'll give my first, and we'll volley back and forth, so to speak.
Sure, sure. All right. So my first one is a movie that is not in the canon. It's another Chaplin film, and I've already talked about it. It's A Woman of Paris from 1923. So this is the movie where Chaplin, the director, really comes out because Chaplin, the star, is not in it. So it's the only one where there's no tramp. It's not a comedy. It's a drama. But it's short and sweet. They just did a really beautiful restoration of it in 4K, so it's accessible. And there's a brand new score that was commissioned by the Chaplin family for it, from the composer Timothy Brock, as well as a score that Chaplin wrote later in his life when the film was re-released in the 70s. So it's a great another great Chaplin film, but one that is challenging because it is not like the Chaplin that
Mhm.
you expect.
Yeah, amazing. So that'll be like maybe like number like 6 or 7 for folks in their in their Chaplin journey.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. I love it. I got to add that to the watch list. Um, okay, I think I'm gonna go in like what would be reverse order. I guess no one knows what the order would be besides me. But I'm gonna start with an album that was added sort of last second because I couldn't think of any other recommendations. Um, but we sort of spoke about how this movie is very critical of the sort of like the systems in place that set up our socioeconomic sort of like place within the world, right? So there is an album by Pink Floyd that is very, very, very critical of said systems of capitalism and all that stuff. A very on the nose album, but also like super weird and experimental, like one of their strangest sort of concept albums. I'm not sure that everyone would dig it, but if you want a 45-minute 5-song album about the ills of capitalism, check out Animals by Pink Floyd.
That's
I
my
don't know
favorite
if I've
one.
recommended that before, but if I have, whatever, check it out again.
It's a perfect record. Just like I'm doubling your recommendation. It is the Pink Floyd record
Yeah.
for me. My next recommendation is another movie. Because I'm the Chaplin guy, it's going to be another Chaplin movie, but he's got 80 of
Hell
them.
yeah.
So, I've got another a feature, but this is a later feature. So there's a film from 1957 called A King in New York, and it's the film that Chaplin made
It's
after he
about
was.
me,
It's about you, yeah.
or it's about it's about our good friend Eric Adams.
um, it's the film that Chaplin made after he was exiled from America. So Chaplin falls victim to the blacklist. He is not quite deported, but he gets on a boat, and then as soon as he's on the boat, the government says, "By the way, you can't come back." And so he goes and he lives the rest of his life in Switzerland. But it is a like just biting satire, and it's great because it's so much later from everything. So 1957 it is, what, 25 years after this movie, after
Wow.
City Lights. So you're getting an older Chaplin. It's talking. He's not the tramp.
Mhm.
He plays a king from a fictional country who ends up in New York and ends up in front of like a McCarthy era tribunal. So it's doing some heavy handed political work, but it's a great film, and it's underappreciated in Chaplin's filmography. So, A King in New York is my second recommendation.
Amazing. Okay, I'm gonna add that to the watch list as well.
Sorry.
Um, no, no, I love adding to my watch list. It's one of my favorite hobbies. And then opening it up and thinking, oh my god, there are so many movies in so little time. uh,
So good.
Very different from the King of New York movie with Christopher Walken, and also sounds like a much more politically aware version of Coming to America.
Sure. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Excited to check that one out. For my second recommendation, I am going to recommend something very dumb. I feel like your recommendations are super insightful, and you're, getting people to like understand Chaplin as a director and like a thinker. And I was watching this movie, and I was like, oh, there's kind of this whole thesis about you know seeing people and maybe love being a little blind or
Mhm.
whatever. What's a TV show about love being blind? Oh, how about Netflix and the first season of Love is Blind? I'm sure I'm sure if Chaplin were alive today, he would also appreciate that as sort of like the peak of um, you know, art that we're currently making. So that's my second recommendation.
I love that. Chaplin would have a lot to say about it, for sure. There's a great it fits in nicely with A King in New York because there's a great bit in 1957's A King in New York where a woman at a dinner party turns to a hidden camera and starts like doing a commercial, and the Chaplin character is like, "What is going on?" So already, 70 years ago, there's sort of concerns about influencers and social media as a cultural touchstone. So,
Yeah.
like, sort of a show like Love Is Blind fits in neatly with this. That's great. I love
Perfect
that.
through line between between those two recommendations.
Uh, and my last recommendation is a book, and I think it's a recent popular history of Chaplin, but like sort of the troubled side of Chaplin.
Mhm.
It is called Charlie Chaplin versus America: When Art, Sex, and Politics Collided, by Scott Eyman. So it's a popular biography. It was released last year or the year before. So
Mhm.
it's really easy to like get into. It's kind of like the perfect, if you have a dad that you has a birthday coming up, it's like the perfect dad book, because
Hell
it's like
yeah.
it's history, it's got politics, but it's about this Charlie Chaplin's troubles with the government and sort of ending up getting kicked out of the country. It's a fascinating read, but it's super breezy. And if you're like interested in um, the sort of political critiques that Chaplin is making in his films, then a biography like this is one that is a really neat read, and it'll get you deeper into Chaplin the person without having to like pick up a 900 page like academic
Yeah.
biography.
Awesome. I love it. Great stuff. All Chaplin all the time,
I'll Chaplin
as it
all the
should be for you. Uh, my final recommendation is going to be a movie because I haven't recommended one yet. And this recommendation is kind of uh, a shot at my fellow writers over at Screenage Wasteland because it is an absolute shame that this movie is not in the canon. But we spoke about it briefly that this movie has an amazing boxing sequence. It sort of moves like a dance right within the ring, the way that scene plays out. Another boxing movie where a lot of scenes within the ring play out like dances, and are just like amazingly spectacular is Raging Bull.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
and
Oh
it's not in
yeah.
the canon, and it's a shame. And we messed up by having that as an omission, but I will take the time now to recommend it because everyone should watch Raging Bull.
Yeah, that's a perfect movie.
Yeah. Amazing. Okay, so Paul, before we get out of here and say final goodbyes, why don't you give us quickly just one, two, three, your recommendations again?
Yeah. So 1, 2, 3, A Woman of Paris from 1923, film by Chaplin. A King in New York, a Chaplin film from 57, and then Charlie Chaplin versus America by Scott Iman.
Amazing. And I am recommending Animals, the album rather by Pink Floyd. Recommending specifically the first season of Love Is Blind because it falls off after that, and Chaplin would not appreciate the subsequent seasons, only season one, and Martin Scorsese's Raging Bull. Um, amazing stuff. Uh, Paul, thank you so much for joining. This has been so much fun. Listeners, make sure you check out Paul on Blue Sky and howtoreadmovies.com. A lot of good stuff. Will not disappoint. I promise you that. And check him out from time to time on Cold War Cinema. Um, I think we're also going to have Jason on at some point this season. So
Great.
a lot of representation from that show, which we love. So yeah, check out Paul in all of those places. Thanks again, dude. Anywhere else where folks can find you?
No,
Maybe
that's
at a
it.
baseball game.
Howtoreadmovies.com. Yeah, well, yeah, come to a baseball game. I will either be at a ball game, the gym, or the movie theater. So find me at your local AMC.
Amazing. Love to hear it. Well, we will be back next week talking This Is Spinal Tap. Very excited for that with Brian Loomis of the What a Picture podcast. So very much so looking forward to that. Kind of a different vibe, but not so much. But another great movie. We hope to see you there. And in the meantime, as always, I will catch all of you lovely folks in the wasteland. Bye, everyone.